Alrighty, gals and guys, so the materials, measurements, and all of that you'll need to get started with this are in the first minute of this video, beginning right now. You can pause the video and get the measurements and what each piece is. And once this part is done, we will start assembling the bag. Alright, so I'm going to start by getting this pocket ready, and I'm just going to fold over about 1/2 inch, 2/3 of an inch on each end, and that's just so when I turn this I do not have to worry about folding that in, and it looks much neater. So I'm doing this pocket as a lined pocket, as one whole piece, so there will be a fold. I'm going to sew down these two sides, and then you will see me turn it right side out, and I will press it, and I will do a double line across that top part just to make it look nice and neat. Alright, so now I'm going to put this on the outside of the bag, and I'm just going to find the center of the bag at the top and the bottom and do the same thing with the pocket. And I'm going to pin it on there, and I'm going to sew around all three sides, leaving the top open, of course, because it is a pocket. And I will also do a double line across the bottom. I feel like that for me is a maintenance thing. In case one of the stitches comes undone, one of the seams comes undone, you've got an extra one there. You know, don't lose anything out of your pockets. Plus, it kind of matches it up with the top. So there's that. I'm going to get that done, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so now I'm going to iron on this fusible fleece on the outsides of the bag. That is for this part, and the other side of the outside of the bag. Just want to iron those on really well. And you'll see that my cuts on some of this are a little sloppy, especially when it comes to the interface. And I just trim it up as I go along, and everything always comes out copacetic. So. Alright, so now I have these pieces for the band for the inside of the bag. And I think I'm kind of just going out of order here, but it was the way I did this. This was actually a process over several days that I constructed this bag. So you see the same thing here. You see some of my interface and overlapping. I'm just going to trim that and iron this on. And there we go. That is the end result of that. And now I'm going to do these little little loops for the D-rings here. And you see, I kind of thought the process through, so I decided at the last minute I would do, like, I sew the right sides together and then just turn it. I thought that would be a better look than doing the little fold over and then sewing down each side. And you'll kind of see me play around with how I did the turning, because this is a little more narrow than most projects like this, so you have to get a little creative if you don't have those fancy little tools to turn it with. And this first one, you can see I did the stick, the dowel method, and I pushed it right side out that way. That is a very slow and kind of a very dangerous process for your project. I have ripped fabric doing it with the dowel before, especially with the more narrow it is. The wider project seems to be easier, but with these narrow pieces you kind of need to get creative. And I remembered when I started doing the second one, you'll see what I did here. And so anyway, you know, it's a different process for everybody. Whatever's easiest for you, just go with that. I decided that I would try the the sewing it into the end method and pulling it, which I find to be the easiest way. If you do it this way, you really don't have to worry about tearing it, and you see how fast it went. Even though I sped it up here, it was way faster and way less dangerous for tearing the fabric than with the dowel method. And you will lose a little bit of fabric with that, so if you're doing a very specific measurement, you want to make sure you add on for having to cut that piece off once you cut the bias tape out. Alright, so for the straps, I'm not going to feed the bias tape through. I'm actually going to put it in sandwich it in the middle with right sides facing together, and fold that over and sew the top part in. And you want to put the bias tape closer to the folded side so that you can keep it out of the way as you're sewing down the long side, because you do not want to sew over that bias tape. You want to be able to just pull it right out of there. And I do find this to be, in my opinion, the easiest method. Even with thinner straps or handles than this, you could have done this easily. The only thing I would recommend is, if you do it this way, adding a little bit of lightweight, like collar type interfacing, just to stiffen those handles up a little bit. I just didn't like how loose and flimsy my handles were in the end product. It turned out really pretty, but I feel like they could use a little stiffness, maybe even be a little shorter, because they are meant to be just handles and not really straps. So to cover the handles, I actually just cut out some little squares of matching fabric, and I thought it would be cute to just kind of have a really raw edged look. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew these over the top of the ends of the handles. And you know, if you don't want to do it that way, you could totally find a different way to do it, but it was the look I was going for. So you'll see me find the middle of the bag, and I'm going to measure 3 inches from each side of the middle so that the straps are 6 inches apart. And you could do them further apart if you wanted to. I just find the 6 inches is the sweet spot for handles. So once I've got that measurement, I'm going to measure down 2.5 inches. And I'm going to mark that kind of half of a rectangle so that I know exactly where the straps need to lie on each side. And I'll do that for both sides of the outside of the bag, and I will sew the handles on. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. I also marked down 1 inch. You'll see me do that later. That was actually an afterthought. That I marked 1 inch from the bottom of each handle so that I could have the little square starting at an even starting point, if that makes sense. So it was kind of an impromptu thing, and maybe it's not the best way to do it, but I don't know. I thought it would be cute. Experimenting always, right? Alright, so what I'm going to do now is line everything up with right sides facing together, and I'm going to sew all the way around this bag, leaving the top open, the top open obviously, and you can see that everything lined up well. At this point would be where you really want to make sure that those handles are laying on top of each other and everything's lined up nice and neat. So now that I've got all three sides sewn, what I'm doing is clipping those corners. You don't clip through the, well, you could in this case. It really doesn't matter because I'm going to cut that off. But I like to clip my corners because it helps me lay that seam down, those seam allowances down, and get this measurement right. So I used a 3-inch wide gusset, and I'm going to do that with both sides of the bag, and then later you will see me do that as well with the lining of the bag. You just have to remember, you know, you can't just do this on the fly and do it any size. You need to make sure you're measuring so that all of your corners turn out nice and neat. So you see, look at that bag. It's looking pretty already. Nicely shaped. Everything's coming together so well. I was so proud to do this bag. I just was stoked at how everything came together just as it should. So now I'm going to add these D-ring loops, and I'm just finding the middle, and I'm just going to tack those on there with just a top stitch so that they stay in place once I start putting everything together. So you can see I've got my old handy dandy antique singer here, and I'm going to put the zipper on. Actually, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my singers. One reason I don't use it as often, I have trouble with it overheating when I wind the bobbin. If anybody has any suggestions for that, yeah. So anyway, I'm going to sew the zipper onto these top pieces first, and this would be just like if you were making a zipper with a lined backside. So you're going to have the big part of the bag on the bottom, and it's going to kind of sandwich the zipper in there between everything. It's just the same method you would do if you had two sides that were the same length, and you want to treat it that way, and you'll end up with the zipper in the middle and at that base of those bands that are going to be on the inside of the bag. And this is just perfect for doing a reset zipper, especially if you are new to sewing and zippers kind of make you a little squeamish. This is a way easier way to make sure that you get that recessed zipper right. I wish I had thought of it a few weeks ago when I was working on a recessed zipper bag, because it left me crying, y'all. It was a really tough project, and I don't think I ever finished it to the satisfaction of, I didn't like the end result. So once I have all of this sewn together, you see that my zipper is super long. I think this was about an 18-inch zipper. I'm just going to sew close to where the seam allowance is going to be and cut that little tail off of that zipper so that it's not in the way. But, I don't have fancy zipper equipment. I've seen some people with rolls and rolls of zippers, and I just admire that. But I don't have that. So I'm using what I've got, and I'm going to trim that zipper down and just sew it in there so that it doesn't come unzipped while I'm getting everything put together. Alright, so you see we've got that zipper sandwiched in between there, and we're going to pull those top bands up and just make sure you open the zipper a little bit, just enough to get your hand in there if you need to. And I'm going to sew all the way down the sides, and leaving a small opening for turning on the side. You want to leave it open enough that you can bring that bag through without really struggling. If you start to hear thread pop, you've got your opening too small, just for future reference. So we're going to turn the bag right side out, just being really careful, getting it through that opening there. Take your time with this. It's not a race. It's not a contest to see how fast you can do this. If you work this bag through a little bit at a time, you won't regret it, because if you bust that lining piece open, you're going to cry over it. You're probably going to have to redo the whole thing. I've torn lining of bags so many times doing this, getting into a rush. And I just do a top stitch. It's not a big deal. It's the inside of the bag. Just be neat and top stitch it together, top stitch that opening together, and everything will be copacetic. So now I'm going to kind of hand press everything down in there and get that top nice and neat and all lined up as it should be. And I'm going to sew a top stitch around it, and that will be the final step of the bag, and I will show you the end results. And this is another step where you actually want to take your time. Don't get in a rush. You could break a needle, you could hurt yourself, your stitches will be all messy and lopsided, but I am just, again, so happy that this bag turned out without a hitch. I love it. I kind of want to use it as my own purse, but I'm not so sure. Got nowhere to carry it, so we'll just see. It may be for sale on my page if you're interested. There is the final result, and you can see it's a nice, good sized bag. When I made it and I had the measurements in mind, I wanted to be sure that it would fit my iPad and a notebook, and those are the kind of things I carry in my purse these days. So yeah, you can do this in any size. You can make your own measurements, you know, just there you go. And again, if you want the fabric, you can find the link in the description box below. This is my own design from a website called My Fabric Designs, where you can design your own fabric or buy designer fabric. So there you go. Nice little recessed tote. Peace, y'all. Bye-bye.